We're going to look at accommodation in its broadest sense, particularly around care and treatment plans and its central focus in supporting people with severe and enduring mental health problems. Just need to acknowledge some colleagues who have been involved in the wider project. I myself am lead psychologist for ABMU's Rehab, Recovery and Low Secure Services. But colleagues here have also been involved in this project and a number of others that aren't the focus of today. What we're going to look at for the next 10 or 15 minutes are some thoughts around the role of accommodation in supporting people stepping out of services, and in particular those that are locked or secure services, but any sort of inpatient service and the pathway that people move through. I'm going to look at environment, and I'm going to use environment in a very broad sense to refer to both buildings and people and supports, and how those are really critical in supporting recovery processes that we all aspire towards being supportive of. And also leave you with some thoughts around flexing needs, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Okay, so foundations then. For me, the environment is a package. We often think about environment and accommodation as equaling a building, but actually accommodation is really the combination of the resources and supports that come in human form, the people, and the building or the place. So it's really important when we're thinking about accommodation and environment that we're thinking about both those elements. The building alone doesn't work, the people don't work, it's having that combination. Just in terms of care and treatment plans, for those of you that are not familiar with the mental health measure for Wales, care and treatment plans are now a statutory requirement for all people accessing secondary mental health care. There must be a care and treatment plan provided with them that describes the care and treatment that they can expect to be part of and to receive. And critically, in terms of accommodation, it forms one of the core domains. There are 10 core domains, and this functions as one of them. The other thing in terms of thinking about recovery is always to think around the ideas of trying to find the least restrictive option, so providing services and care in the least restrictive method possible, and trying to use accommodation and other resources as creatively as possible to help people's well-being. Okay, just in terms of thinking about accommodation, and this is just one of a number of ways you could represent things. What we've got here are different forms of accommodation, really reflective of the level of support that goes alongside them. So for most of my day job, I work in the top two, the inpatient secure and rehab services. But then we have high relational support, where we have community provision that has very intensive staff support, and that's going to be the focus of an example I give you in a moment. 24-hour staff, floating support and independent living. A couple of things to note in this. One is that with each of those comes a move of home. And what we know is that one of the most stressful things for all of us in our life is moving house. If you've got somebody who's in secure care, you're building them almost with an expectation of at least 6 future moves before they can start to establish themselves. So one challenge for us is to think creatively about moving people. Can we not move resources instead? The other thing that's really important to think about in here are that people may need to move up and down without it becoming a permanent place of residence. That we need to be quite flexible about allowing people to move forward and also have periods of time where they can step back into somewhere else that they know, where they can then move on very quickly again without them becoming trapped as a readmission, for instance, when they come back up the top. It often then starts your journey again for moving on. It doesn't need to. Okay, some thoughts around what accommodation should be providing, and again I think the measure gives us some framework that helps with this. At its most basic, from the psychology of the 1950s and 60s, we know that everybody needs a secure, stable base. They need somewhere that's safe and warm. So at its most basic, our accommodation should be providing those basic needs: security, warmth, safety. But good accommodation needs to do so much more. And it needs, firstly, to facilitate community integration. We heard this morning, for those of you that were at the keynote speech right at the start of the day, about this contagion effect of healthiness, well-being, that people living in certain or near people who are happy and healthy tend to get sort of a contagion effect of also having that. People need to be connected. There are very few hermits amongst us. Most people want to live and be integrated into their community. So good accommodation facilitates that. It helps people be integrated and connected. It also needs to promote normalisation. It needs to foster the idea of living like everyone else, about having normal routines, being part of having domestic responsibilities, etc. And from that, it then provides a place with which you can go out and engage with the world. And that's where our support, the people, come in, is about facilitating these other things, but particularly about leaving that safe base and going out into the world. So what I want to talk about is one partnership example that's local to Swansea, that was set up about 3 years ago. And I'm just going to talk about the first year of the project running, just to give you an example of how accommodation and some of these issues around flexibility can be played out. Just in terms of the context for the project was designed as a high relational support community project, but in mind were people who had highly complex and long-standing mental health needs. They were individuals, by and large, who'd been in inpatient settings or other similar settings for 10 or more years, and were expected to remain in hospital for a very long time. So people have very complex histories, very complex needs, and also present sometimes with challenging behaviour. What was done was to try and come up with a community model that might use some of these ideas of community integration and fostering independence to see whether or not that could help people with their recovery. Because one of the things with being in hospital is that you're very cut off from the world. No matter where the hospital's placed, it has a long driveway or a long way before you get into a community, and without supports, it becomes very difficult to access the community. Okay, the first thought then is about flexing resources. As I say, one thing that we tend to do is move people around. So when somebody develops more independence than is available in the project, we say to them, oh, it's time for you to move now. You can pack your bags, we'll move you on to somewhere else. Well, actually, that's really unhelpful. What helps me be independent is having lots of support around me, my partner, my children, etc. So moving me out of that and saying, you can go off and live in a flat on your own, probably isn't a great idea. Certainly not for me, anyway. So just in terms of flexing resources, one thing that we've got here for data, and I would say that anybody involved in commissioning or delivering services, you must figure out ways of evaluating them. Having data is your best friend. So us having data for this project was really useful in terms of being able to make service changes that were based on evidence, not hunches. So one thing that we've got here, this is almost the first year of operation, and each of those lines represents a different individual. So we can see that different people needed different resource. No particular surprise, but we've got evidence for it. Even within high relational support, where people were in inpatient settings, some people don't need very much, some people need quite a lot. The other thing is that once people have done that initial move, think of yourself moving house, when you first move in, you have lots of people around to kind of reinforce that you're doing the right thing and that come and look at your home and all the rest. It's quite intensive, and then you get into a pattern and a routine. We get exactly the same here. So to start with, we've got people having about 67 hours of support in one form or another per week. Within the space of 9 or 10 months, that's gone down to about half. Again, we've got people needing more, some people needing less, but we've got good evidence that we can flex the resource rather than say to the person in the bottom dotted line, oh look, it's time for you to think about moving on to perhaps just some floating support. I'll leave you with that as a thought, not necessarily, you don't have to agree with me. The other thing that is very evident is what people are supported for. And the vast majority of support is around promoting and maintaining well-being. It's helping people achieve this idea of being integrated in the community, being part of their surroundings, accessing everyday things, like the leisure centre that we're in today, using resources that are there for everyone. And what's evident is that within the support that people are getting, a large component of their support is about support to access the real world and be outside the home and to be managing their own well-being, rather than everyday tasks around personal affairs and things.
You do 5 minutes, Josh.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm coming towards an end. Some important things as part of evaluating projects. Those last two slides are around the inputs and how we can flex from a staff point of view how we evaluate things. But it's also important, as we've just heard, to get user voices about what's it like. And that's no mean feat. It's very difficult to get subjective views and accounts of what's been the impact of moving. But here are some of the things that were quite evident. For all of the clients, there was either a stability or an improvement in both their health and their well-being. So despite the fact that these are individuals who I say could well have been receiving care within inpatient hospital settings for a long time, they were doing okay. And in fact, for a lot of them, they were improving. They were feeling better, more confident, having higher self-esteem, as well as aspects of their health being improved. They all felt safe. Remember, the basic first point was about we need to be able to provide somewhere that's safe, warm, secure. That was reflected in all the comments from the service users. And people were exercising choice. Lots of the people when they left hospital were identified as having poor decision-making skills, problems with complex tasks, etc. They were all exercising choice to some degree or another, some in very complex ways about putting together very complex programs of activity and engagement during the week. Surprisingly, people had more family contact. This wasn't something that we were expecting to see, but family contact improved, as did social integration, which was something that we were focused on. And formal OT assessment showed that across every individual there were notable gains in a tool called MOHOST, which is an activity and occupational functioning assessment, and some individuals quite dramatically so. So some final thoughts to leave you to have over your lunch. Accommodation, we need this range, we need this spread, but particularly when we're thinking about out-of-hospital accommodation, we need to think about how flexible can the accommodation be versus how flexible can we be to sort of maximise people not having to constantly move. What we do know, though, is that accommodation availability and suitability varies by area, and it's well beyond me to work out solutions to that, but that is a real challenge, I think, for us, is to find suitable accommodation that can be used. What's evident, though, is that accommodation well placed and with that broadest sense of being both a place and the people really can help promote growth, recovery and independence. Here's one little example of partnership working. I think there's lots of opportunities for health, third sector, other agencies to get together and solve what are very expensive problems, but with very creative, say, problems in terms of where do we place people. Accommodation is a very expensive option, but we can do that really effectively. We can really help people maximise their abilities. We also need to think about how we embed evaluation, because one thing that's really striking is that something that I hadn't realised when we embarked on this project and we put together some very simple evaluation is that when you look elsewhere, there isn't much evaluation. So I would, as I say, right at the start, embed evaluation in some way, because your data really does become your platform from which you can say, not only is this needed, not only do we think it's a good idea, but actually it does work. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy your lunches.